Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Don Marsh. The billion-dollar and counting success of the film Black Panther has caught the attention of a lot of people. It's hard to imagine that it won't inspire other films. One thing it is doing is awakening a new interest in Africa and Africans. Good news for the organizers of this weekend's African Film Festival at Washington University. It will give viewers of 7 featured films a closer look at people, places, and culture in such places as the Congo, Senegal, and Nigeria. Joining me in studio is Wilmetta Toliver-Diallo. She is the founder of the festival, an assistant dean in arts and sciences, and senior lecturer in African and African American studies at Washington University. Joining us by phone is Rokhaya Diallo, a French director of one of the 7 films being featured this weekend. Her documentary is titled From Paris to Ferguson. And we should point out that you two ladies are not related to each other.
We are not.
Just good friends, I hope. Rokhaya, thank you so much for being with us. Let me ask put the same question to each of you. And Wilmetta, start with you. What is the importance in your mind of Black Panther? We can't turn on the radio or the television set or have a conversation without its coming up.
Well, I think the film is important for a lot of reasons, but I think the 2 things that stick out for me is really trying to help people understand the richness of global Black culture. And they do that in a few different ways, but with the music, with the actors, it is clearly a truly Pan-African cast. And then I think with the costumes, which is what I'm most drawn to, it really helps people kind of increase their vocabulary about the rich heritage of the African continent. I know the costume designer, Ruth Carter, drew a lot of inspiration from lots and lots of different ethnic groups. And I think hopefully that sparks curiosity that everyone can kind of get to know the rich diversity of the continent.
Rokhaya, what's your take on it? You live in France. Give me your impression of the importance of this film.
To me, it's a very important film regarding the question of the Black diaspora, the African diaspora, being, French with African roots. I was very interested in the fact that, people from France, from Africa, and from the U.S. could relate to that story in the same way and could find some figures that would, tell that would be very meaningful to them. So it's an important moment to be able to celebrate a film at the same time with people who live on different parts of the world.
I can't tell you how many African Americans in this country I've heard express a source of pride, a new and renewed pride. Do you detect that same sort of thing on the other side of the ocean?
Yes, definitely. I've seen so many kids, French kids, being so proud of, being for the first time depicted on screen, being the heroes, having, because many of the French Black people are from African origin, so they have parents who are from Africa, from several different parts of Africa. And generally speaking, whenever they hear about their country of origin, it's not something positive. Mm-hmm. So being able to go back to school and to tell about their country of origin in a very positive way, being proud of the country of origin of their parents is something very new. And I think that it will change something from the younger generation.
Well, Mehdi, you're hearing the same thing I am.
I definitely think so. I think that's the same for African Americans. But even with the growing number of African nationals living in the States now, I feel that the children of those families also can go to school with pride in a different type of way, but all of it bringing together kind of a conversation about the diaspora in a different level.
What is the impact of this film likely to have on your festival this weekend?
Well, that would be interesting to see. I know one of the films that we screened that was made maybe a year before Black Panther came out has a lot of the similar themes. And so it would be interesting to hear audiences' reaction to L'Orage Africain, which, talks about the media, which talks about self-determination amongst nations, which talks about Africa being more than what we see and imagine. And so it would really be interesting to hear people's feedback after watching that film, having seen Black Panther.
Give us some sense, if you would, some sense of the range of films, of the 7 films that you're showing.
So we take we use a lot of time to find films from different countries. We want to make sure that we represent different regions. We also, in picking the films, also try to show a really great bustling urban landscape, but then contrast it with people who don't live in a big capital city so that people can see different geographies. And we definitely try to find films that have different forms of storytelling so people can see the breadth and the growth of African cinema over the years.
And Rokhaya, if I can ask you to tell us something about your film. There certainly is a local connection, as we see in the title.
Yes. So, its title is, the French title actually is From Paris to Ferguson, Guilty of Being Black. And for the American title, I decided to entitle it Not Your Mama's Movement. So as a French journalist, being close to activists, I decided to spend some time in Ferguson for the first anniversary of the death of the young Michael Brown. And I wanted to understand the relationship that there could be between African Americans in the U.S. and Afro-Europeans activists, because we in Europe face the same issues with the police brutality, even if the level of violence is not the same. I was interested in the fact that our media in Europe covered much more the police brutality in the U.S. than in France. So I wanted to understand more about that.
Have you seen this film yet?
I've seen the film, and I think Rokhaya really points to the important reason why we have the film is to really talk about how we can have Black global discussions, but really understand what's going on with Blacks in Europe and even people in Africa. I lived in France for 3 years, and I would agree that we're bombarded a lot with the U.S. media, but there is not the same knowledge of what's going on with Blacks in France in the U.S. as there is vice versa. So that's why the film is important.
And I guess we're going to continue that discussion following the presentation of the film, Rokhaya. Is that correct? You're going to be available to answer questions?
Sure, I will be glad, especially because it's the first time that my film is screened in St. Louis, and I have some of the people that were in the film who will come from Ferguson. So it's really meaningful to me to come as a French journalist and filmmaker to have a discussion on the meaning of being Black and being potentially oppressed by the institution. So I'll be happy to answer to all the questions.
Do you think going back to the film Black Panther, because I think we're all agreed that it does have immense impact, past, present, and future. Wilmetta, do you think that this is going to lead to an increase in the number of films by African American filmmakers about Africa? And is that your hope?
So I don't know if that is necessarily my hope. I do hope that there's a continued interest in understanding the specificities of different cultures in Africa. But I do hope that it increases the appreciation for African cinema. There are lots of African filmmakers who might not have the same distribution opportunities that a film made in Hollywood would, but they have really great films and they're really trying to tell authentic stories. And so I hope that with Black Panther and some of the actors that were in Black Panther who have their own kind of career in their own countries, that interest will then cause people to want to see more African cinema and experience more African films.
A lot of people may share the sentiments of our president, who has some very derogatory comments to make not too long ago about African countries, the S-hole comment that most people are familiar with. The films you're showing this weekend, in one way, are really designed to disprove that kind of comment, aren't they?
I mean, they're definitely designed to show African realities. And so that is why we really do pay attention to try to have diverse countries represented, diverse landscapes represented, and then also show the humanity and relationships, because that's something that's universal. And so we hope that through the films we're able to show that, and that definitely does combat that comment.
Rokhaya, would you comment on the comment made by the president, how it was received by you and people in France?
Of course, it was seen as being very offensive. Many people reacted to that. But I think that disrespecting Africa is not only in words. I can tell from my perspective as a French person that there are links between France and some African countries to me that still have still echoes the colonial link that France used to have with some African countries. So I think that our president, even if our French President Emmanuel Macron, even if he would never made such comments towards the Africans, still has a certain way of approaching Africa, which may be, I think that it would be a good thing if it could evolve in something that would place Africa at the same level, the African countries at the same level as the European countries.
And that point is definitely the most prevalent point in the films from Friday night in L'Orage Africaine. I mean, it is about that, the neo-colonial relationship and the image of Africa in the West and how to combat that and be on the same plane.
Let's talk about that image for a moment. What are the misperceptions and conceptions that you think people in this country might have about Africa?
Well, I mean, I think that, there's a sense that there's nothing but poverty, war, and military coups, and that's something that's not true. There are certainly some places that have experienced that. I think the biggest thing is that Africa has a lot of natural resources, and there's some politics around why they're not able to fully exploit to their own advantage those resources. And then I think in terms of youth, which is why we kind of have an eye on youth film, is, there's a lot of great association with Africa and animals, but not necessarily with the people who live there and how they carry out their everyday life. The natural resources are both a blessing and a curse, are they not? Because that's basically one of the prime reasons for colonialism. Definitely. And then I think it's, but being able to control and figure out how you use that, how countries can use that is important. Go ahead. Rokhaya, you want to say something?
No, I totally agree with what was just said. The misconception about Africa is that people tend to think that, all the people are the same all over the continent, whether it's not the case, it's not the case at all. So displaying different kinds of Africans with different cultures is, as you can see in the film, you have different, tribes around the king. It shows that Africa is not a country. It's definitely not a country.
Right. And that's the challenge we have every year. We usually only have 7 to 8 slots of movies, and there's so many different cultures, and there's so many diversity within certain countries as well. But we do our best to try to introduce St. Louis to different countries each year.
How long have you been running this festival?
This is the 13th year of the festival.
And what made you decide that this was something you really needed to do?
Well, I think it was feeling like that there were a lot of stereotypes about the continent, and then also wanting people to have a visual sense of what Africa was from a filmmaker's own eye was one of the reasons. And I think that, the film allows you to have like a mirror into or a window into a particular culture for a few hours, and it was the best way to kind of do that. Film is the best way. It's a visual medium to do that.
If I can go back to Rokhaya now, and your film From Paris to Ferguson, you spent some time in Ferguson, you said. What did you learn there that may have application back home where you live?
I learned a lot about organization and about, how to occupy the street to make, your claim and your demands visible. We've had some cases of police brutalities in France, and people were not able to take up the ground in that way. And I learned a lot about the fact that many of the activists that were active in Ferguson were not, activists in the first place. They really transformed themselves into activists when they faced just the unfairness of the death of that young kid, young teenager. So that's what I learned back home. And the other thing is that maybe we should be able to tell about our own stories, because we tend in France to focus much about what happens in the U.S., about the black communities in the U.S. Even, when you go to the movies, when you go to the cinema, the first time I've seen black people on screen, it was, in American TV series, on American films. So we need to produce our own images, and we need to raise our own voices regarding our own, our own concerns and own, issues. So that's something I learned, and I'm really willing to work on.
There is a Black Lives Matter movement in France, isn't there?
Not really. It would be different because in France, most of the people who are killed by the police are not black but Arabs. So, from Arab background, so they are from African descent because it's mostly people from North African descent. But you have, mostly Arabs and black who are killed. So we need to reframe that, that way of chanting, the fact that minority lives matter in our own French way, because Black Lives Matter would be totally relevant in France, but probably not enough, as many people who are not black are killed for the same reasons.
Let's go back to the festival now and some of the other films, Wilmetta. You've alluded to a couple of them, but let's go into a little more detail about what you're going to be showing, so people can get their tickets and get there on time.
Right. So what Rokhaya just said reminded me of one of the other films that's important, which is called Samedi Cinema. It's actually shot in Senegal, and it's about a movie house, kids rushing to buy tickets before the movie house closed. And that brings to light another issue that I think a lot of emerging African filmmakers are facing. So we're in Senegal, the home of African cinema. Sembène Ousmane was the first African to make a film, and he's from Senegal, and they have a burgeoning, I guess, industry of filmmakers, but there are really no longer any movie houses to show films. And so you have filmmakers who come in the summer, like Alan Gomez, who is also featured in the festival and set up open air theaters for the community. But that's another issue, that even if you're making films for people, about your intimate experiences and community, that there is still some politics around being able to show films. And so I think that's an important film that we show. And then I think the big film that we will show is Félicité, which won the FESPACO, which is the biggest Pan-African filmmaking awards in the world. It's every 2 years in Burkina Faso, and it's about the Congo, set in Kinshasa, but it's made by Alain Gomez, who is a Senegalese filmmaker. Mm-hmm. And it's wonderful. It's great because it's different than kind of other linear films. It's a little bit experimental. And Alan Gomez does that a lot with a lot of his films, but it has gotten rave reviews internationally, won a few awards across festivals. And so we're excited to have that. And L'Orage Africain, which I spoke about, was the second place winner at FESPACO. So we have the first and second place films here this year.
You're going to be providing awards yourself for the films here?
So we don't jury our films. I mean, my goal when I started the festival really was to just build an appreciation for the diversity of African culture, but then also kind of increase our visual vocabulary of African cinema itself. So it's free, it's open to the public, but we don't jury the films.
Why has it taken so long for African filmmaking to emerge?
Well, filmmaking started in 1963, which is right after colonialism. Mm-hmm. I think that in places like New York and Chicago, they've had African film festivals for a long time. And in St. Louis, it's just newer. But what I do appreciate is that the first year we had the festival, we didn't know what to expect, and there was an interest there, so we have kept going. You can see some African cinema at the International Film Festival as well. I think what's made it easier for filmmakers to make their films is when we first started, even 13 years ago, a lot of African filmmakers were still shooting on 35 millimeter. Huh. Now that it's digital, it's easier, it's cheaper, and that's also aided in that.
Rokhaya, what sort of a reception has your film had in other places that it's been shown?
A very, very interesting reception because people are not really familiar with the fact that such issues can be important in France, because when you think about France, mostly you don't think about the minorities. You think about the Eiffel Tower, you think about, the museums like the Louvre or some other places, but you never think about, a country struggling with multiculturalism, with struggling with, accepting its new face. So that I had very interesting responses, and the film has been aired on a TV station which is named TV5, TV5, which is aired. It's a francophone, French-speaking channel which is aired all over the world. But I have had reactions from Latin America, from Asia, from Africa, and it's very interesting because people are not used to hear French minorities speaking up against racism.
Mm-hmm.
Plans for another one? A sequel, perhaps, or something to follow up on From Paris to Ferguson?
Maybe. My first documentary actually was named The Steps to Liberty, and it was following a group of African Americans who went to Paris to discover, France through the racial lens. So that was the first part of my film. So maybe, I don't know, maybe I will next time focusing on France only and trying just to face what's going on France without having, the necessity of seeing my country through the eyes of Americans, or, having my perspective compared to the American perspective as well. So it's difficult because it's much less acceptable to speak about racism in France. The countries, they like to speak about the racism from the others. Like in France, you hear a lot about what's going on in the U.S., but when it comes to speaking about what's going on, in France, it's much more difficult. But I think that's something that is really needed.
How do you find find people to filmmakers to show in your festival?
So I scour a lot of old festivals that just happened. I always look at FESPACO. I also have a partner in New York, Mayan Bonetti, who runs the huge African Film Festival, who is a mentor of mine. So I look and see what's coming out, what came out the summer before. And then I watch them, and I try to balance one film over the other to have different genres in different countries.
We'll let folks know that the African Film Festival at Washington University's Brown Hall is beginning on Friday evening. Is that correct?
Yes.
And running through the weekend.
Yes. So we have screenings at 7 p.m. each night, and an additional Eye on Youth on Saturday at 3 p.m.
We'll put all of that information on our website at stlpublicradio.org.
Thank you.
Hope you have a great festival. I want to thank you, Wilmetta Toliver-Diallo and Rokhaya Diallo, French director and activist, for being with us. Good luck with the film at the festival.
Thank you so much.
Archive versions of past St. Louis On the Air are available for download or podcast at stlpublicradio.org. St. Louis On the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio, 90.7 KWMU. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Don Marsh.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, committed to conservation and careful management of the state's forests to make them more resilient and better habitats for wildlife. ChooseWood.com.